trans vegan death cult. Potentially an interesting discussion, I think. Like, is there a link between something like veganism and cultism? A lot of conservatives would say yeah, and of course they're the ones really focusing on the trans vegan aspect of this alleged cult. But I think even reasonable people who aren't anti-vegan because bacon good are curious. Before I start, I just want to say that I'm not going to focus on the transgender aspect of this cult or supposed cult, other than to say that most members of the cult appear to be transgender, overwhelmingly trans women, and that this maybe isn't surprising given how the leader views the human brain. Also, there are higher rates of mental orders like depression among trans people. This could make a trans person more likely to be indoctrinated. Another quick note, this group is kind of an offshoot of the rationalist community, the modern day rationalist movement, CFAR, effective altruism, stuff that I am kind of aligned with as well. Also very concerned about the future of AI, which I am as well. I have a video on that. Point is, we have a trans, vegan, rationalist, AI-obsessed death cult. Okay, let's get the death part out of the way, and I do not mean that insensitively, but more like, that's not what I do here. This is not a true crime channel and never would be. I despise most of that stuff. I think it's just morbid speculation disguised as investigation. These are real people who likely have family and friends mourning their loss. So briefly, 6 deaths have been some way associated with the Zizians. That's what the media is calling them based on the leader Ziz. To be clear, I don't think they call themselves that. I don't think they have a name or, consider themselves like a group. Certainly not a cult, but no cult says they're a cult, right? Anyway, several people associated with Ziz are also linked to murders. One is a person of interest in the murder of her parents, Richard and Rita Zajko. Several are suspects in the murder of their landlord, Curtis Lynn, and one has been arrested. Those are circumstantial, at least so far, but the case of Border Patrol agent David Milland is seemingly not. Teresa Youngblood and Ophelia Buckelt were stopped near the border for an immigration inspection. Ophelia, a German national, had an expired visa. At some point, Teresa pulled out a firearm and shot and killed Milland, and Ophelia also went to pull out a firearm and was shot and killed by the officers. Officers found a bunch of suspicious shit in their car, including ammunition, and this is the first anyone had heard of Teresa or Ophelia for months. It seems they had cut off contact with their family and friends. Teresa's parents were worried she was in a controlling relationship, and they reported her missing in May of last year. The 6th death is an alleged suicide by transgender woman Maya Pasek. She was in close contact with Ziz and was apparently practicing this debucketing process with Ziz. More on that later. Oh, and Ziz faked her own death in 2022, and no one knows where she is currently. And in 2019, Ziz and several of the people, persons of interest in these cases, protested at a rationalist convention, a CFAR convention. Police were called. There was word that they had guns. There were children there who were there for a different thing. They were wearing Guy Fawkes masks. So you can probably see why this word cult is being thrown around. Several people who knew each other or very likely knew each other and this person Ziz are linked to murders, and cults are often linked to murders. Cults also tend to encourage isolation, removing yourself or cutting off contact with friends and family. It seems at least 2 members have done this. And cults tend to revolve around a weird figurehead with weird or even dangerous beliefs. So let's talk about Ziz and her beliefs. Voidgoddess.org is an archive of Ziz's previous blog, sinceriously.fyi, and reading it is funny at first and then really sad and kind of scary. Let's start with her views on cognition and morality. Her writing is not always easy to understand, but fortunately, she created this handy little glossary. Core is something in the mind that has infinite energy, contains terminal values you would sacrifice all else for, and then do it again infinity times with no regret. Seems approximately unchanging across lifespan. Figuratively, the deepest frame in the call stack of the mind, capable of aborting any train of thought. Everything the mind does is because it decided for it to happen. It operates by choosing a narrative frame, module, algorithm, or something like that to run, and is responsible for deciding the strength of subagents. There are actually 2 of them. In order to use some of my mental tech, they must agree. Simple. Who couldn't understand that? Yeah, it's very obnoxious, esoteric writing. But from what I understand and what others have said, our brains have 2 cores, the left and the right hemispheres, and they are like kind of different people. Someone said like dissociative identity disorder, 2 different personalities. Each core can be good or non-good. A person total of both cores can be non-good, so both cores are bad. This is the most common. Single good, which is 1 good and 1 non-good, or double good, which is both cores are good, and this is very rare. And good is not really how you and I would define it, of course. Ziz also believes these cores can be separated or debucketed via unihemispheric sleep. Basically, you try to make one side of your brain fall asleep while keeping the other side awake by getting comfy, closing one eye, and leaving the other one open and like focusing on something to keep that side awake. So one core is awake and the other is asleep. The core thing is not a thing. I don't know why or where Ziz got this. It is pretty ludicrous. And her weird definition of good and core and structure can have some pretty scary consequences. If you see here, the psychopathy definition, it's definitely romanticizing psychopathy. As long as it's exhibited in a double good human, it's fine. The unihemispheric sleep thing is a thing, kind of. There are animals who do this. It's pretty cool. Humans don't. And the idea you can keep one side of your brain awake and the other side asleep by closing one eye makes no sense. That's not how the brain works. That's not how the eyes work. I could find nothing suggesting one part of the brain controls one eye and the other in the other eye. It's just so stupid. Regardless of its validity, unihemispheric sleep seems like a pretty culty thing to do. You know, you have this Ziz who's like, hey, I can show you your true self or true selves, I guess. Just hang out with me, a double good person, one of the only double good people, and get fucked up on sleep deprivation. No, that seems fine. There's plenty of other kooky stuff here too. Timeless decision theory is the one I was familiar with and seems to explain a lot of Ziz's reasoning. Rocco's basilisk, I was not familiar with. Tulpomancy? Yeah, that's a new one for me. What I'd like to turn to now is this post by Ziz called Net Negative, and this is about conversations Ziz had with other rationalists years ago, I think in 2018 before the 2019 protest. It's very sad, but also very scary given the current context with the murders and cult shit. It's clear to me, having read this, that Ziz believes most people are bad, and she is good and better than virtually everyone. Better in the sense that she knows what's best or can reason what's best and be honest about it and willing to do whatever it takes to literally save the world. I think these beliefs cause her to be really skeptical of people's motives, even when they show affection toward her, maybe especially when they show affection toward her, and in turn, skeptical of criticism of her beliefs. I described coming to see the ways in which mostly everyone's interactions were predatory, abusive, fucked. Observing a particular rationalist couple's relationship had given me a sort of moment of horror and sadness at one of them destroying utility, happiness, functionality for the sake of control, and I had realized at once that if I continued, I'd never be able to stand to be with any human in romance or friendship, and that my heart was filled with terrible resolve that it was worth it, so I knew I would continue. So yeah, she's a martyr for the cause. I described how I felt like I was the only one with my values in a world of flesh-eating monsters, how it was horrifying seeing the amoral bullet-biting consistency of the rationality community, where people said it was okay to eat human babies babies as long as they weren't someone else's property if I compared animals to babies. How I was constantly afraid that their values would leak into me and my resolve would weaken and no one would be judging futures according to sentient beings in general. How I was constantly afraid if I let my brain categorize them as my in-group, then I'd lose my values. Yes, flesh-eating monsters means meat eaters. She says this throughout the post. Myself and most vegans, I would guess, are pretty vehemently against this sort of thing, this us versus them mentality. It's just a really goofy, inaccurate way to view the world and to ultimately treat people. And I think it's bad for her, bad for us vegans psychologically, if we feel that way. Filling yourself with that sort of hatred and inevitably isolating yourself from others, right? Because who wants to associate with evil flesh-eating monsters? In Ziz's case, it's even worse. You know, like a typical vegan would at least align themselves with other vegans. She has no one, right? It's just her. She is the only one who holds her values. She's the only one willing or capable of saving the world. And if she gives in just a little bit by, befriending people or seeing herself as part of a group, then her whole moral crusade is at risk. I talked about how I thought all our cultural concepts of morality were corrupted, that the best way to hold on to who I was and what I cared about was to think of myself as a villain, face that tension head on. Yeah, it's really no surprise that people adjacent to the rationalist movement or even like within would consider themselves part of it have been warning about Ziz well before the murders. This is Zizians.info and it goes back to at least 2020. It's at least 5 years old. Ziz claims that each hemisphere has a gender and that fairly often people have opposing gender identities between hemispheres. This provides a convenient basis for her to undermine the identity of people she's recruiting. If the target is cis, tell them their other half is trans. If the target is trans, tell them their other half is cis. It's a similar disorienting trick to the idea of single and double good. If the target identifies as good, tell them their other half is irredeemably evil. If they identify amorally, insist that half of them is a saint. The pattern is to take aspects of folks' identities that they're invested in and disrupt them by creating a domain of self which Ziz, and only Ziz, has knowledge about, so the target is forced to trust their interpretation. Anyway, back to net negative. Everything is for the cause, as indicated here. She was asked about her sexual preferences, and though she didn't want to answer, she did anyway because save the world, of course. She says after the singularity that she would like to imagine all of the suffering she's caused and every awful thing she's ever seen, that I would want to know exactly how many animals I had killed before I became a vegan. If the information could be recovered, I wanted to know who they were. I would want to know how many more people could have been saved if I had tried a little bit harder. And then I wanted to finally lay the anger I held onto for so long to rest, knowing it was too late to do anything different. This is bad. This is terrible for one's psyche. I'm not saying we shouldn't care about mistakes we've made and harm we've caused, but you don't dwell on it. I've talked before about vegans who think we should keep watching like slaughterhouse footage, keep inundating ourselves with these horrible images. I think Freely has promoted that. I just do not agree. I truly believe the vast majority of us cannot help others without helping ourselves first. And dwelling on the past, holding on to anger does not help ourselves, nor does it help others. The person Ziz was talking to said that she wanted to leave because she was getting hot, and Ziz wonders to herself whether this is actually true. I considered it for a moment. I didn't want to get them to stay just to cover up an excuse, but it seemed wrong as policy construction to make the rest of probability mass slave to that small comfort when this conversation potentially concerned the fate of the world. Again, I was not exaggerating when I said saving the world earlier. Everything has that potential. So she has to question, she has to overthink very simple things. Someone's hot, so they want to go inside. She tells a story about worrying over ants in her bathtub when she needed to take a shower before work. She didn't want to hurt the basically causally isolated people, but smelling bad at work could, of course, destroy the world. To be clear, this is not inherent to veganism. I do not believe ants and people are morally equal. There are some vegans who say that all lives are equal, all sentient beings are equal. They don't actually believe that. Our actions say pretty clearly that none of us believe that, including Ziz. Although she's certainly taking it farther than most people. And doesn't seem to be for the best. She talks throughout about her trans identity and, worrying that the rationalist community doesn't take it seriously. And it seems at least one person involved in these conversations does not. And this is obviously deeply upsetting to her. And I think, although she would not admit this, I think this gave her more reason to distance herself from people. This and the sexual misconduct allegations associated with certain rationalist leaders that she believed to be true and actively being covered up. This seems to have played at least some part in the decision to protest back in 2019. Finally, we have more mistrust. Social interactions seem to be transactions at best. Even the one person she believes does care for her, she still has to overthink it. Overall, I'm left with the impression that this is a stream of consciousness journal from someone processing depression and emotional manipulation, using the tools of the cult they were indoctrinated in, rationalism and pop culture references, to do so. I mostly agree with that. Ziz's writings suggest someone who is not socially typical, I'll say, and is deeply isolated and deeply depressed. Which came first, the isolation or the depression? Who knows? Regardless, we have someone who believes no one else holds her values the right values. If she gets closer to people, she'll be corrupted. Every decision she makes is potentially world-ending, and any decision is worth it if it could save the world. The end justifies the means times 1,000. This seems like a recipe for severe depression, paranoia, misanthropy. If you're trying to be a super net positive person, which she seems to be, I don't think those are typical traits of world-saving people. And I think even the way she writes shows such a disconnect with others. I don't think you write this way if you want to connect to people, if you want to build relationships, if you care about people understanding you and providing feedback. But that just might be a criticism of philosophical writing in general. Back to my original question, is there a link between something like veganism and cultism? Yes. I mean, various cults, I can think of 3 off the top of my head, have encouraged veganism or do encourage veganism. But also, veganism is fringe. Yes, I know we have more protein alternatives. That doesn't mean veganism is mainstream. Just because people know what TVP is and have tried a Beyond Burger does not mean veganism is mainstream. The vast majority of people still eat animal products at every single meal and see no issue with that. Sorry, that's just a huge pet peeve. I keep seeing it everywhere and it's obnoxious. Vegan is still weird, and weird attracts weird, and the very weird people who are vegan are probably going to espouse very weird forms of veganism, like that we should agonize over a few ants in a tub because they're people too. And if you aren't vegan, you're evil. To wrap this up, I don't know if the Zizians are a cult. I'm not an expert in cultism, but clearly something is very wrong here. Clearly there's culty stuff going on. And clearly this is not a healthy way to live. At best, it's terrible for the person living like this, for Ziz. At worst, it's terrible, it's dangerous for others. If you truly believe everyone else is wrong and the end justifies the means, like truly the end justifies the means, well, if you believe some people need to die in order to save the world. Anyway, I know this is kind of a weird video, but I felt compelled to talk about it given that I am vegan. I'm concerned about AI. I'm, adjacent to the rationalist community. I'm not involved with any of the people in the community in any way, but I agree with rationalism at its core. I'm a big fan of effective altruism. I, really respect people like Peter Singer. And of course, a lot of people who are anti those things or those people are really, I think, kind of enjoying this, saying, see, we knew you guys were all crazy. We knew this was a cult. I think just like veganism, effective altruism, all that stuff is also fringe. So it's going to attract weird people. And sometimes weird people are not just fun weird. They're scary weird, non-good weird. Oh, I can't believe I forgot to put this in there. Well, I guess I can do it later. I'll just say it now. The person who is being detained right now for the murder of Curtis Lind, has put out a statement, just mostly talks about veganism, the importance of being vegan. He calls on a very prominent figure in the rationalist movement, I forgot his name, calls on him to be vegan. Yeah, it's weird. And National Review calls him the worst poster child, I think they said, worst poster child for veganism. It's just like, okay, who said he's the poster child for veganism? But also, fair enough, yeah. I would rather him not be tied to a really important thing. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this very weird video. I have a bunch of links in this description, some from people who have done really deep dives into Ziz's beliefs and theories, hypotheses, whatever. So check that out if you're interested. It just makes me feel icky, honestly. It just feels like I'm reading from someone mentally deranged who just like needs a hug. They just need, I don't know, they just need some normalcy. You know, they need to settle down, have kids. Maybe that's offensive, but sometimes I think people just need to live a normal life. Although if you believe anything is good as long as it's potentially world-saving, okay, maybe don't have kids. Thank you so much to my patrons and my members here on YouTube. I do post 2 exclusive videos a month for Tier 2 members and patrons. I do a vlog and a controversial topic. I have 25 controversial videos now. So if you join now, you can watch all of those. That's pretty cool. I also have a bit of merch, and I have an Amazon store page with random stuff I recommend, like books. A lot of these books back here. And that's it for me. Thanks, guys. New video soon. This video by Tim Pool, I don't think I've ever seen, other than like little clips when I was on Twitter a lot years ago, but I don't think I've ever seen like a full video from him. He really does link this to Trump's win and Antifa, of course.
My fear, these kinds of things will ramp up substantially because Trump's actions are pronounced, to say the least. What we are seeing in Trump's first 2 weeks it's apocalyptic to the liberal world order, the deep state, and to wokeness.
And most of the video is just him reading this Washington Times article. It's riveting.
They're kind of bird-like, aren't they? You know, if I looked at Antifa and had to describe them, lanky, gangly, you know, very bird-like.
I don't know, I'd rather look like a bird than be linked to Russian propaganda. That's just me. Figuratively, the deepest frame in the call stack of the mind, capable of aborting any train of thought. Everything the mind does is because it decided for it to happen. I can't read this. Oh my fucking God.